My name's Tim from Surf School Lanzarote, Surf School Sri Lanka. We're going to talk about surfboard design, and it's one of the biggest things you've got to consider if you've been surfing for years, or you're like intermediate, or you're a beginner, is making sure you got the right surfboard. When people come to our school, we keep a contact with them. When they leave, we want to make sure they've got the right board. We choose boards for them from the internet, and we actually design and build boards for them. Different companies all the way around the world that we have an association with, great shapers. In Portugal, Nicaricho, Jean-Louis Legrand, we have Adrian in France, Adrian Phillips in the UK. Companies all the way around the world that we know that we could get great boards built for you from. These days we have computer shaping, so we can put an AccuShaper file together, send it to our shaper, and you'll get exactly what we know our instructors or myself know what you should be riding for the future, and that will develop your surfing. So that's a lovely thing about our surf school. It's a funny thing I always say, you could have really the best physical condition, your wetsuit's fantastic, and the surf is perfect for you, and the wrong board, and it's going wrong. Change it round where, you know, you don't feel brilliant, but you're okay. Your wetsuit's not the best ever. The surf isn't that great, and you've got a really good board that works for you. You're having fun. So it's that important. After all the safety stuff, for me, it's one of the most important things. So we're going to talk about the boards that we think you should be using. And one of the strange things about surfboards is we need to know that when we start, we need something that's easy for us to use. That's why you see us using big boards. But the funny thing is, people think, well, you see a little child, imagine, and they're about, 6 years of age or something, and they've got this little board that's about that big, 5'6" or 5'5", and they go, oh, look at the little board they've got. Now that's like you and me riding like a 10-foot surfboard. That's a huge paddling, gliding, riding machine. So what we've got to think is that we start kind of big. Now you might move down to shorter boards. Maybe you like riding. Your ambition is to ride a short board. Great, go for it. Maybe you want to stick to what we call mid-range boards. Or maybe you fall in love with this thing called longboarding, so you stick to longboards. Or like me, you want to ride everything. Short, long, or my instructors, they ride all types of boards. So have an open mind about boards, but don't rush through your journey. If you're with us with the surf school, we can care for you all the way through that journey, okay? So what I'm going to use is a longboard. Now a longboard, what's a longboard? A longboard is any board of 9 feet and over. And this is where we have to get used to the world of feet and inches. Now, I know in windsurfers we use metric. Many of us have been brought up metric. But when we go back to surfboards, we're going to have to work in feet and inches. How long is a foot? Well, approximately that's about a foot long. And there's 12 of these things here called inches in that foot. Now, just get a measure out and have a look at what feet and inches are. And this board is 9 feet long, okay? And any longboard is actually, kind of the rules of competition stuff, 9 feet and over. So when you've got that 7.6 or the 8.2, it's not a longboard. It's what we call a mid-range board. Some people use the word mini Malibu. I don't use it much. I use the American word mid-range. Okay, so here's our longboard. 9 foot long, and it'll have measurements. 21.5 inches wide. Now we will measure the width at 2 points. At the middle point and where the actual widest point is. Because the widest point might be a little forward of center on some boards, a little back of center on others. So that's our wide point. Nose and tail. Now those measurements are where I just go up a foot from the nose, measure across. That gives me a nose measurement. So I know on this one I've got like an 18 3/4 nose. Tail measurement, same idea. I come up a foot, I measure across, and that gives me a tail measurement. Now, you may not know your nose and tail measurements, but they're really good things to know. And if you're talking to a shaper or a friend about your board, try and find out the nose and tail measurements. Thickness. Now, unless the thickness, that's how thick it is there, unless that's written down on the board, it's really hard to find. You need what we call calipers. These things are like a wooden thing, they're easy to make actually, and you just put them together, pull them off the board, put them on your measurement, on your measure, and you can find out how thick it is. It's really important you know the thickness of your boards. This one running at about 2 7/8. All these smaller measurements, 2 7/8, you'll get used to those. If you start looking at a ruler, look at a measure, you'll see how it works. Volume is huge. That's a new thing really in surfing. It's been in windsurfing for many, many years, that we know the cubic litres of a board. So for instance, in shortboards, I know I prefer riding in a conventional kind of shape, 37 litres. I kind of like a lot of volume in my boards. I'm riding an experimental board at the moment, Jeff McCoy Nugget. It's huge, 51 litres, but it's only 6'8". So got that language of litres. Find out the literage that works for you. Some websites will have it on there, and you can go onto the Firewire. There's a couple of other ones, I think Rusty Pressendorfer websites, where you can find out how you use a litres tool for different surfboards. Really good thing to have, understanding that. Okay, so you start to learn the measurements of a surfboard, and it's a little bit like we know how many gigabytes are left in our computer or how many litres of engine in our car, you know. Find out the literage of your boards if you can. Okay, once I've got those measurements together, I'm going to look, always when I look at a board, and you might be choosing one to rent, I'm going to look at what we call the outline or plan shape. That's basically its shape. Okay, and I'll look at that, I'll go, okay. It's a longboard, it's 9 feet and over, and a longboard or a mid-range board will have some particular things about it. Firstly, you'll see the nose area is wider than the tail area. Now that was really developed for this lovely thing you see doing on longboards called nose riding, but it helps you. The more wetted water, you know, the more water hitting that nose, that'll help you plane and get into the wave early. It's good for wave catching, having that wider nose. The tail area, as you can see, is narrower than the nose area, which when you're learning is great too. It allows you to sink that tail and turn. Very different from a lot of shortboards you may see, where the tail area, in fact, is wider than the nose area. Okay. It's got like parallel rails. I'm not saying the rails are parallel, they're not, but they're gently curving. Again, unlike the more radical curves you see on a shortboard. So it's really designed to glide, catch waves, and we can take that outline in a longboard, and you'll see it here in what we call a mid-range board. This one's 7.3, but have a look, it's kind of very similar in its outline. Narrower tail, wider nose, more kind of parallel running through the rails. Very different performance, but having the same kind of characteristics, and great when you're learning. Okay. Once I look at my plan shape and I look at my measurements, often your measurements will be written down on the board, which is great. And if they're not, very often, you can find them off a website. You know, if you bought one of these production boards, or you're going to, it'll give you often volume, nose, tail, thickness. They'll have those measurements on there. So, you know your measurements. That's right, the instructor at that school said I should have like an 8.6, and I should have this and this. Great, pick it up. Stick it under your arm. The first thing it's going to tell you, and I always ask when I'm doing this with a group, I ask them questions, what will it tell you? Sometimes people say, can I carry it to the beach? That is not a major consideration. If it's a board that's difficult to carry, but it's really right for you to surf, then stick it on your head or get somebody else to help you. And I actually have had people say, oh, I need a 7.6 or smaller. Why? Because that's what fits in my car. That's not a good consideration. You need to get a set of roof racks if that's the case. All right, get under your arm. What do you feel first? Well, you feel the weight. Light is good. Heavy is not good. Heavy is good when we go to longboards, these things called logs. That's a whole different thing. You want light, and with the new epoxy materials, light and strong is great. It used to be light would be very delicate. They can still be, but light and strong is possible. You'll feel the width of the board. You think, oh, that's narrower than the last board I had, or oh, that's a bit wider. Even without knowing the measurements, you'll feel that it feels wider. The balance of the board. I always get the board in my hand. You know, getting a board and choosing or finding a new board is a tactile kind of thing. You want to get it and feel it and run your hands over it. By the way, there's a wonderful thing called the shred show. Watch the shred show, and he's always kind of feeling the boards. That's how we learn, he says, about the boards, by feeling them. So you get that board, stick it like that. Have a look at the balance of the board. Sometimes you will find a board that's very nose heavy. That might be from a repair, or it's taken in water, or tail heavy. There's too much fin in it. But generally, a lot of boards, you pick them up in the middle, you've got a nice balance to them. Great. Balance, thickness, width. Just run your hands over it, and the next thing you do is so vital. You look at something we call rocker. Now, rocker is the curve that runs through the bottom of the board. You could say almost like the banana likeness of a surfboard. Right? Rocker is probably the single biggest factor that will affect the performance of your board. Maybe not the number of fins, maybe not just the outline, not the thickness or volume, but rocker. And this is how it works. A lot of rocker, like popular from Kelly in Kelly Slater, the great Kelly Slater, 11 times world champion at the moment in 2015. When he was a young man, he rode heavily rocker boards, really difficult to ride, you know, and thin. And it helped that young Kelly turn and turn and turn. Actually, he moved away from it. The industry did it for years, but now we've flattened out our rockers. Now, you see the thing with the heavy curved board, lots of curve through it. It'll turn, but it won't paddle and it won't go, and that's a big consideration for you guys. You want to pick up waves. And surfing's not just about riding the wave, it's also about paddling out and getting out to the waves efficiently. So what we did over the years, I wasn't a big fan of the big rockers at all, and slowly we've developed a much softer rocker. We call it a 3-stage rocker, which means I've got a curve in the front, which is basically to stop us nosediving. It's pretty obvious, and it lets the water enter. Then I've got a flatter area in the middle. Now that flatter area in the middle, you know, that's our engine. That's where we paddle from, where we catch our waves from, where we accelerate from. We might be using footwork to go forwards. And don't think footwork's just for a bigger board. It's short boards as well. And at the tail area, it curves away a lot more. And that is our turning area. Some of your best turns you'll ever do will be right from the back of that board. Have a look at the curve on this one. You'll see that little flip in the tail, curve in the front, flatter through the middle, curving away at the back. Okay? So, that is super important. Rocker is a lovely book by Nick Carroll, Surf Better, I believe it's called, and he says rocker runs the show. It's a nice way of saying it, really. It is a super important factor. You'll never get a flat surfboard. Nobody will ever make you one. But if you look at a really sort of fast vehicle in the water, we're looking at a rescue board, which often is quite flat, not much rocker, and just a curve at the front to go out through the waves to get people, you know. So, rocker, super important. Next thing you got to think of, when you've got that board, you had a look at the rocker, yeah, that looks cool, it's not too radical. If anybody gives you a board that the nose looks like a Turkish slipper, you know, like Aladdin shoes, you don't want to go there, okay? You got that? Okay. Feel the rails. Rails are super important. They're really subtle what's going on with these rails. They can also super affect the performance of a board. Now, when I was a kid, our rails were very round. I think you can almost see this rail here, right at the front there. It's kind of round there. Round rail. Why would I want a round rail? A round rail sucks water. It grips. Hydrodynamically, it's a great idea. It grips. And when I was a kid in the 60s, the rails were kind of what we call 50-50 rails. That was great for nose riding. We'd sort of like have big, heavy boards, go to the front, glide across. As the short boards came in, a fantastic shaper in Hawaii called Dick Brewer, he changed our rails. He took that curve, all that grippy bit there, and he put an edge underneath it. He kind of made it what we call a down rail. It was quite sharp like that. But as we've developed now, this edge is so important. Now we call it a tucked under edge, but I like the word, it's a release rail. So the water releases. You see, this part is gripping, and that part's letting water fly off the bottom. And where is it really important for the water to leave? Out the back. So you'll see this edge here is particularly hard all the way at the back of the tail. Our rails will change all the way up. They'll be softer, slightly harder, more rounded. A great thing for you to do is to experiment how the hydrodynamics of a rail works, and this is what you do. I hope you do it. Go in your kitchen and take a spoon, like a soup spoon or whatever, even a teaspoon. Hold the spoon very delicately at the back and put the back part of the spoon into the tap water. And you'll feel it go, bam! It like grips you. Whoa, that feels really strange. That's how a surfboard works. You see, the rails keep you in the water. People think the fins do. It's the rails that keep you in the water. The fins help, but they give you directional control. You can ride across a wave holding into it as the Alias, the ancient Hawaiians, would use, just by the grip of the water wrapping around the rail. If you turn that spoon around, bing, 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 it pushes away from the water. There's our edge. Yeah? So do it, and you'll go, oh, wow, that's how a surfboard works. Okay. Rails are changing all the time at the moment. Softer, grippy rails, transforming. It's really complex, but really important. Again, with cheap boards, often the rails are not shaped so well, and that could really affect your performance. Okay. Decks. Your deck should be flat. I mean, this is pretty flat. What does a flat deck do? It helps you make a mistake. You put your foot slightly in the wrong place, you can still keep riding. Because there's another type of deck called a dome deck, where this part here is a lot higher than that part there and that part there. We use it often like with big wave boards and stuff. Imagine, if my thumbs here are the bottom of the board and my fingers are the top, that's a dome deck. You put your foot wrong on that deck, you're off. So you want a much flatter deck, which will help you make a mistake if you put your foot in the wrong place, which we often do. So flat decks, especially when you're early surfing. The bottom of your board is incredibly subtle. There are lots of things going on. We're going to use this longboard to show you an example. The front part of this board here has a concave. It's a dish in here. Now that concave, that kind of dish thing, you can see it there. You can actually see it. It's a great big old concave in it. That concave, it's there for this beautiful thing called nose riding. You see a longboarder walk right to the end and stand there and then come back. Fine. But that concave also will help. It'll help lift the nose. That's what it's there for. And often I see my kind of intermediates and beginners, when they're first on the longboards, you know they would have nosedived, but the concave just kept them out of the water. So, it can help you with that. It's not there for that reason. It's up to you not to nosedive, but a concave can help. But imagine now if this concave kept going down the board. If I ran that concave a little bit further, or right down that board, suddenly I've got like a channel. And that channel would like really make the board fast. A full concave bottom can be difficult to ride, but really fast. Kelly was riding these super concave bottoms. Quite difficult. But we've got something in the back of this board which is completely different from concave. It's the complete opposite. Concave creates lift. Like the wing of a bird, air comes along and it can hover there. But now I want something that lets the board turn from side to side, and that is V. It's either a V like that or a roll V. Have a look at the back of this board. You'll see pretty clearly, if you look down the board, you'll see how the middle part there is higher than one side or the other side. This part here is significantly higher than that bit there and that bit there. This is called V. Now for me, the inventors of the modern shortboard, Bob McTavish, Dick Brewer, and sadly I'm only old enough to remember those things coming along, and the V just helped that board turn from rail to rail. Sometimes when I design boards all with a roll V, super soft, and they can roll around in their turns. But what happens now is that I could take this concave, I could run it down the board, and then have a concave here, and a concave here, and leave a V in the middle. This is called single to double concave, and it's pretty much an industry standard. It works really nicely. So we play around with the bottom of our boards, and they're incredibly subtle. Again, with a lot of the cheaper boards, some of the cheaper kind of boards on the market, you see, the board's flat on the bottom. That's difficult. It's not going to allow the surfer to develop. Now, I'm not saying when you start to surf, it's like learning to drive, that you need a Formula One car when you learn to drive. You don't. But you need quality and subtlety, like learning to drive in a nice BMW. You know, you've got something that'll go fast, turn well, it's controllable, it's got good subtlety in it. So having a really good bottom on your surfboard, no matter what your level is. I even design softboards and use them at my schools with a roll V bottom. I don't think there's many people doing it, but they're brilliant. They turn side to side. Okay, that's the bottom of your boards, super important. This, our fins. Now this board has got a single fin in it, and it's got two little places where you could put an outside fin in it. On this design, I actually like taking the outside fins out. But the single fin is kind of the same family as the three-fin surfboard. So imagine if I had fins in this one, it's a three-fin surfboard. Now, I like people to stick really to the fins that the designer put in there. So, you know, they've obviously thought about the board and what fins go with it. Don't always think by changing the fins you would change your surfing, you know. Often just stick to the fins that the designers put in. But the fantastic thing now, when we travel, we can take these things out. Years ago they used to be stuck in the board. Now, they're great. You can take them out and travel. So, you can play a little bit with the performance of your fin. For instance, even with this board. And this is huge. If I move this fin up the board will be easier to turn, not so controllable. If I put it right to the back of the board will be a little stiff, but that might be good for a big wave. So you could play with that. I like to have most of my surfers ride their fins kind of at the start, middle of box, just careful with fins too, they can get sharp. So a safety consideration, you got a sharp fin, take a bit of sandpaper and smooth them off, okay? Right. Fins, you could talk all day about fins. I used to design fins and there's so much to them. But wait till you're surfing really kind of solidly before you start playing around too much, okay? Now then, your tail shapes should be basic. I like people to just ride rounded pintails. What's a rounded pintail? Well, this is really. It's kind of a pintail with a very narrow tail. This is kind of the same thing, but then rounded. You got square tails. I like those when people are learning to surf. They kind of look like, if you looked at my fingers now, like that. Rounded pintail, like that. Pintail, no, not really. Fishtail, you don't really need it at the moment. Keep it simple, keep it basic. Some of the best boards you'll see being ridden Pro Tour, just simple rounded tails. Okay, keep things simple. That really is enough that we're going to say about the design features of a surfboard. There are many, many, many more things. I mean, just the rail aspects, the rocker. When we have an AccuShaper computer file, you will not believe how many measurements a surfboard, how many you can take that would affect the board, especially the rocker, the graduation of the rocker. But let's look at other parts of the board you have to think of. For instance, the leash. That leash there we've got there was as long as the board or a little bit longer. Get a good leash. Again, like cheap leashes, not the best. This is not a safety device. I think it's this company here, Ocean Earth, on their packets it says, this is a convenience product. It will never replace good swimming ability. Don't trust this to keep you safe, okay? It's just stop the ball going in front of rocks, stop it hitting other people. But get a good leash. You should have a swivel, what we call a swivel. It's just this thing at the one end, and you got another one at the other end. Make sure you got a good, strong bit of string that's holding it on. And check your leash every so often for little cuts and stuff, because they will, you know, fins can cut them and stuff, you know. Stop your swimming, but again, you should be a happy swimmer when you're surfing. That Velcro there, I mean, check it every so often. It doesn't get worn and it's going to come off you at the wrong time. There's a key holder if you want to. You can put a key inside there. Okay, leashes, good things and bad things. For me, I like people to find a really quiet bit of beach one day, take the leash off, go for a surf. And after a little while, maybe after your third swim in, your balance will improve incredibly and your board holding skills will get brilliant. Okay, so leash is great. be aware they're not a safety device. Okay, so your leash is there. Foot patch. I like boards, the smaller boards, particularly, I think anything under 8.6. I even ride my longboards with a foot patch. I'm not a very conventional longboard rider. Like my foot back there. Shorter boards from 7.6 downwards, absolutely put a patch in there. I even like kind of the 8s and 8.6s. Why? Well, there's a couple of things happening. That zone there is where your most perfect turns will come from. Most riding takes place from there. The more radical turns, foot goes into the back. So if you've got a foot patch and you're learning, you're probably not even touching it. Your foot's probably up there a lot of the time. But it'll teach you, hey, I want to feel for that patch. Okay? So I like foot patches, but wax is the main thing that's going to keep you on a board. Use the right temperature wax for where you're going. You see people traveling with the wrong temperature. It's a nightmare. Good wax. And try and get these little bubbles out of it, these bobbles there. You just smooth. You see people rubbing really hard. You don't need to. Get your wax, smoothly go up and down it, and that will build up these little bubbles, yeah, these little kind of lumps. You've got different wax for different temperatures as water, as we said. If you're in the UK, France in winter, Eastern Seaboard, United States, and on, you're going to use cold water. Southern Australia, cold water wax. You may find, like they do in France, they go from cold water wax to warm water wax. Here in the Canaries, we nearly go from warm water wax. You could use tropical sometimes. You go abroad, Bali, Indonesia, Mexico, Sri Lanka, or wherever, you need tropical wax. So make sure you've got the right wax when you're traveling. I like to use a wax comb. That's a comb that you rough over the board. I like that, you know, just that little bit of stickiness on the board. And, you know, wax yourself all the way up. You know, you don't have to be just a patch there and a patch there. Especially intermediates, beginners, wax the whole thing, okay? This board is always being attacked by sunlight. So bags are great. Bags will stop your wax melting a lot, but bags, these kind of things, here, I'll show you one now. It's just a cloth bag. And this cloth bag, this is one from the school, it's got the length written on it. This cloth bag stops the sunlight attacking it, stop the wax going on other boards, and it's just looking after the board. It's like putting your favorite guitar, if you've got one, or violin in a bag, you know. If you go traveling, whoa, then you've got to buy a good travel bag. The airlines are no great lovers of surfboards at times, so make sure you've got a good quality travel bag. It's heavy duty, it's got heavy padding inside it, and what I do is I use one of these and then I put that in my board and put the whole lot in my travel bag as well. Okay, travel bags are super important. Take care of these things. Really look after them. Don't use them at home for jump practice. There's other ways of doing it than using your surfboard. But this is the thing that, as we said at the start, will give you the most fun. Listen, this is petrochemical industry, everything. You jump on a plane, wetsuits, lycras, leashes. We're kind of a weird sport where we care about the environment, but we're quite heavily polluting. It's kind of weird. And this is not very biodegradable. So a lot of us in the industry are always pushing to try and get our industry to use alternative products, but you can redress the balance anyway. We're in a plastic kind of sport, maybe join Surf Rider Foundation, Surfers Against Sewerage, something that's going to really kind of make a difference in the long run, because surfers, we got to care for this environment or our grandkids aren't going to be doing it. Our school, we're very grateful to everybody who comes to it because you're helping people in South Sudan, and you can find out about that on the website, and it's been a great achievement to help so much, so have a look at it. That's enough about surfboards. I mean, it's just touching the surface of it all, but ask questions. If you come with a school, you know that you're going to end up riding the right board, which is great. Ask us questions and we'll always be happy to give you the answers. I've been involved in the surfboard industry since 1979. Worked with the great late Bob Liddell, or Blackie, back in North Devon. He's still making amazing boards. Nick Aricho, the late great Randy Slay. I mean, made boards for Pipe Masters. Incredible. And we have a good knowledge. My instructors have a really good knowledge of surfboards. So always ask questions. We'll give you the right answers. Thanks.